Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to PYA's latest webinar, Optimizing Industry-Sponsored Clinical Trial Administration. This webinar is intended to address several key clinical research areas at a high level for purposes of introduction across multiple organizations. Additional detail on these and other considerations associated with industry-sponsored clinical trials will be the subject of future PYA thought leadership. We welcome your feedback on future topics as well. PYA is happy to present today's webinar on this important topic. You may submit questions during the webinar by typing a message into the questions pane of the control panel. Also, immediately following the end of the webinar, you will be asked to complete a short survey and submit any additional questions. We'll respond to questions posed after the webinar via email. We have posted in the handouts pane of the control panel a PDF copy of the slides for your reference. Also, you'll receive an email later today with a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar. With that, I would like to introduce our presenters, Deborah Biggs, Jennifer Parnell, and Katie Croswell.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We are thrilled to be talking to you and reviewing with you industry-sponsored clinical trials, administrative management. And we're going to take a moment here and introduce ourselves. I'm Deborah Biggs. I'm a principal with PYA and the director of our academic medicine practice. I've been with PYA for a few years. I come out of academic medicine and have spent most of my time working with large academic medical centers, but more recently with health systems of all size, physician practices, community hospitals. So we're excited here to talk to you today about some of the issues that we've seen, solutions that we've seen, tips and ideas about clinical trials management. I'm going to turn this over now to Katie to introduce herself, and then Jen for herself.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm Katie Croswell, and I'm a consulting manager in our revenue integrity and clinical research service lines. My background is in compliance program administration and coding and documentation compliance programs. I'm now going to pass it over to Jen to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Parnell. I'm a clinical research professional with 35 plus years in clinical trial experience, primarily in a large academic medical center, and I've been excited to join PYA on this new clinical trial adventure, and looking forward to sharing some of our tips with you guys.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Jen. And as I mentioned, and we've all talked about, we're going to talk to you about challenges that we've seen with our clients, tips, and then some of the services that we offer as well. And so we're going to spend most of our time here talking about this from this slide. And as we've talked about a little bit, clinical trials can be really daunting, and particularly these industry-sponsored clinical trials. And they seem complex. We think that there have been a lot of changes in recent years that help make this more approachable for our clients. And then also some things that we can suggest that might help you in your thought process about trying to move into clinical trials if that's new to you. And then also if it's on the other side of it and you've been doing them for some time, but you're having some issues and you'd like to see if you can improve some of your administrative services, we can talk about that as well. So the first thing we're going to start with is optimizing reimbursement, which is one of the biggest areas and issues. So when you first decide that you're going to participate in a clinical trial, you might get that offer from your industry sponsor that has the protocol and a budget. You take a look at it, and Jen, what do you do?
Well, that's the thing, Deborah. You know, when you first are chosen or selected as a site, you kind of get inundated with paper. And the first things that you're really going to get sent are the protocol, the sponsor offer, their first offer for the budget, and a bunch of other key regulatory documents. And really, the first thing you want to do is kind of take a step back and realize, number one, that first offer from the sponsor is just that. No one is expecting you to really accept that initial offer. They're not going to share that with you, because if you will, it's just, you know, all the better for them. But you really need to know that internally, that you've got some time to put together what your costs are going to be. And the way you really want to go about that is dig into that protocol, really take a look at it, figure out what is it going to cost? What are they even requiring us to do in this protocol? What are the procedures that are going to be involved? And what's our fee schedule? And have we established a fee schedule yet for even doing clinical trial research? Again, remember, it's just a first offer. Take some time to take a look at it, look at your feasibility, and go from there. Thoughts, Katie?
Yeah, Jen, so the process is usually front loaded. It may seem daunting at first, but once you sort of get it down in the beginning, it will go smoothly after that. If you do run into some issues with negotiations with the budget, consider expanding your negotiation parameters. And, you know, don't be afraid to use previously agreed upon negotiation language in your budget. Jen, anything else I missed?
I think it's just key to remember that the sponsor is going to be trying to work with you to negotiate the best budget for them too. So remember, you're going to hear things like, well, everybody else says, and everybody's willing to accept. And just realize this is your time to put forth your budget for this trial.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that, you know, some organizations might have a standardized process there, some might not. If you're a physician practice, you might not have any processes associated with that. And so once you have kind of spent the time and effort into, and let's talk about that time and effort of creating your fee schedule and understanding what your costs are. And is that transferable, do you think, to other trials?
Oh, absolutely, Deborah. I mean, that's the thing. You have to remember that as big as this clinical trial world is, it's also quite small. You take the time to establish some of your fees up front. The next time you work with that sponsor, they've already seen it from you. They already know. They have your documentation. You know, it really becomes a non-issue. It's just a little overwhelming at first, but once, as Katie said, once you dive into it, you'll really get the rhythm for it.
Yeah, and I think that negotiation piece, Katie, that you spoke about is really key there too, because that's an area that feels very daunting, particularly for smaller practices or organizations that have not participated in the clinical trials before. And when they get that first set of documents, they think, this is really it. This is what I have to go forward on. And that feasibility component of it, I don't think we've mentioned that piece of it, but do you have the right patients? You know, can you do all of the services that are set forth in the protocol? And what would it take for you to do that? Most often we see organizations that are trying to enter into this space because they're trying to meet the needs of their patients. They might be in a rural area or underserved area that they want to then try and extend some of the care that's available by participating in these clinical trials to their patients.
Yeah, Deborah, I'd agree. I think COVID really exposed a lot of that, a lot of these trials not being out into our rural areas and into our small community practices. You know, in the very beginning, the COVID trials weren't getting to those places. So people had to travel a long distance. And let's face it, you know, our customers and practices alike all want to be able to offer the best care to their patients, the most innovative care. And I know we'll get to staffing later, but some of this kind of comes back to, you know, having the expertise to negotiate these budgets and really know what you're talking about, which I know we're going to cover in a bit.
Yeah, and even if, as we said, you know, that this is front loaded, I think Katie, you mentioned that the work here is going to be front loaded, but it's also front loaded in terms of thinking about if you're new to clinical trials and the first time you do it, you're going to have a little higher lift at the beginning, but then it gets easier if you can focus on getting that standardized process down in your budget. It really comes down to knowing your costs, right? Now let's talk a little bit about those regulatory documents that came along with your packet. Because there's been a lot of changes that have occurred in more recent years. And when I say more recent years, I'm really talking in terms of a decade, but it's changed things, the way we look at IRB approvals and some of the regulatory piece. So John, how about we let you pop in there first?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Deborah, you and I both have experience, you know, decades ago of clinical trials taking, you know, 9 months to a year to get through a local IRB. I mean, that was really kind of commonplace. And that doesn't happen anymore, really, with the inception and adoption of the commercial IRBs. It's really opened the doors wide open for all comers, really, to be involved in clinical research. Nowadays, when we get a pharmaceutically sponsored clinical trial, it is either in the process of being approved at the protocol level by a commercial IRB or already approved. But the bottom line is what that means is that by the time you submit your submission for your site level approval, you're really just filling information about your local site, how you're going to recruit, how you're going to go about storing data, things of that nature. So it's really taken the onus off of all that work that went for those local IRB submissions, is really just made it so much easier.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, Jen. I don't think that smaller physician practices or community hospitals should feel overwhelmed by the regulatory piece. You mentioned that large packet that comes from the sponsor, and that's going to include the Medicare coverage analysis and qualifying clinical trial analysis. And those forms are pretty self-explanatory. And, we've even walked through those forms with clients to help them navigate and feel comfortable with completing those forms.
Yeah. Keep going, Katie.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask Deborah if you had anything to add on that.
Well, I think that was just a really good point. I was thinking about my own experiences in the past of how daunting that can be to get those, and that what an improvement it is to receive that packet with that information already in a way that you can complete those forms. And once you've gone through them once or twice, you can really develop a comfort level of doing them yourself, or you can choose to outsource them.
Well, that's the thing too, Deborah. I mean, a lot of those forms even come in mostly pre-filled from the sponsor, so we're just putting in local site information. So, the work that comes to us now has been simplified so much compared to the old days.
Right, and you made a good point earlier too about having worked with a sponsor before. So if you've worked with them again, right?
Yeah, it's really, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. They know you now. They know your site. They know your policies. They know your fee schedules. They even know your address. So when the 1572 form comes out, that's already usually pre-populated as well. So it's really that first initial uplift that I think can be a little bit frightening to people, but doesn't need to be.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, then let's move on to timing, because that we've seen move a tremendous amount in more recent years. It used to be, I remember being back in this, where it would take 6 months. It wasn't unheard of for it to be 6 months or even a year working through all of these processes and, developing your budget, doing the IRB, negotiating the clinical trial before you're ready to enroll. And it wasn't uncommon to complete all of that work and find out that the study had already enrolled all of their subjects.
We're not absolutely right. Yeah, that's absolutely right, Deborah. And, part of this kind of goes along with the inception and acceptance of these commercial IRBs, because now it isn't just large medical centers, academic medical centers doing this work. Other groups are getting involved. And you know what? Those long timelines that were so common for AMCs just aren't acceptable anymore. Now it's a 90-day drop dead timeline from the time that you receive what they call the initiation packet, that first packet that comes to you, to the time that they want your first patient enrolled. Those long delays just simply are no longer acceptable. And let's face it, I mean, really now we're looking at a 45-day turnaround is really being ideal. And these protocols are virtually all competitive enrollment. So if we're going to take the time to stand up this trial, let's get it done early, let's get it done quickly, and let's enroll as many patients as possible so that we can be successful in this trial.
Yeah, absolutely, Jen. And some of the tips we've provided our clients for improving their timing is knowing their costs up front. That helps tremendously, saves a ton of time, and developing standard processes. Lastly, with the adoption of the commercial IRBs, that's really improved with completing tasks in parallel. Before, the local IRBs used to have to approve a trial before you could create the budget. And now that's just not the case anymore. So there again is another way to save time.
And those are all really good points. And while we've said 90 days is really kind of your drop dead, we have, clients that are very competitive and are at the 45-day mark. So
that's really what you should be shooting for now, Deborah. I mean, if you're really going to be competitive in this market, if you really want to do this, 45 days is really the number to go for.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well, let's move on to really the next three things we're going to talk about are kind of variations on the same thing, which is the staffing part of it. This is just I've had this in every organization I've been a part of or clients that I've served, is trying to identify and work through the staffing issues associated with this. So, Jen, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, staffing has, and it probably always will continue to be, a big issue. There really aren't that many clinical research professionals out there, experts out there. And the ones that are out there end up being cannibalized by either other departments within academic medical centers, and quite frankly, from centers to pharmaceutical sponsors. I mean, when they say see good staff, people are coming for them. So it's hard to keep these experienced and trained staff within your four walls. What makes it where you see this the most, I think, is really evident in the startup timelines and getting that work done up front. You really need people that know what they're doing when they're negotiating your trials, because they're going to be up against people from the sponsor side that are experts in their area as well. And we laughingly talk about the used car salesman tactics, but it's really not that far off. I mean, there's gameplay, and you need to know who you're dealing with and have experts on your side to be able to help you along and represent you.
Yep, absolutely. So how can you deal with this staffing issue? You know, what are some solutions? And, you know, one of them that Jen mentioned is outsourcing. You know, you could outsource some of these functions. The other option is to think about possibly shared services within your organization, which could ultimately lead to, you know, higher employee satisfaction because they're being involved in different areas. Some other, you know, tips or tricks is, you know, making sure you have internal standard operating procedures or checklists for employees to complete, and make sure that you're performing a quality assurance check on those.
I think half the issue too, guys, with staffing is that, sorry, Deborah, I didn't mean to interrupt. You know, but the other thing that we have to remember is turnover. Turnover is really hard. You know, and on a lot of organizations, they may have one budget person. That budget person leaves, they're kind of in a bit of a crisis. You know, so it's just kind of an ever evolving situation. And that's why being able to outsource some of these, particularly startup and maintenance workflows, is really important. It's a great opportunity for people that don't have the bandwidth to be, you know, carrying full-time staff with their benefits for, you know, volumes that ebb and flow.
Yeah, so I was going to hop in on that piece because, of course, outsourcing is an option, and that's something that we offer. There's also the piece, though, about the shared services, and as I've, you know, lived through this industry, I think that that's one that really needs to be focused on more, if you will, for those large academic medical centers and large organizations, because this really isn't, this is not the meat of it. You know, this is the time period of 45 days, and you need to nail this as an organization and then get to what it is you do uniquely as an organization, which is actually providing the research and providing the services to your patients and meeting the needs of that particular protocol, and not to worry about this front end work. I mean, there's a lot of challenges on the back end as well, but this, you need to be able to get to those patients in the enrollment, and if you can't get there, then it wasn't worth any of the lift.
Well, that's exactly it, Deborah. I mean, these protocols have come to you, these studies have come to you for a reason, and it's usually because you're an expert in your field as a physician. You know, that's where you need to really put all of your time and effort, is enrolling these patients, taking care of these patients. This administrative work is pretty standardized across all trials. All trials require the same approvals before you can be up and going. You know, let a group of experts do that, whether it's through shared resources, outsourcing, so that you can get to what you really do best, which is taking care of your patients.
Right, and that's the same thing for the unpredictable volumes, which I think, Katie, you mentioned as well, which is you just don't know when they're going to ebb and flow. And so all of these tips that we have described, particularly the staffing, would relate to that issue as well.
Right. Yeah, I think the idea that you have to do all of these tasks internally is just sort of an archaic or outdated thought process.
Yeah, that's really true. So let's just hop back and review for a quick minute the things that we've said here that clients we've seen focus on, or tips that we have. Do you want to take us through that, Katie?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So starting with reimbursement, ways to optimize reimbursement, know your costs, develop your fee schedule, and remember that the first offer from the sponsor, it's just an offer. You can go back and negotiate. Jen or Deborah, did I miss anything there?
I don't think so.
You got it.
Yeah.
All right. Then when we get to regulatory, remember those forms are pretty standardized. They're pretty straightforward. You're really just filling in your local information, and having those external IRBs have really made quite a difference. Lastly, we've talked about staffing, expertise, and unpredictable volumes and have offered quite a few suggestions. Consider that shared service model. Consider outsourcing. And we'd be happy to speak with anybody on any other tips or tricks on developing standard operating procedures or quality assurance processes.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've spent all of our time here focused on the front end and then getting to the startup. And I think as a future, we'll come back and talk to you about the next stage. A lot of these same things apply that we've described in terms of tips. But if you'd like more information about what it is we do, you can come to our website, and there's information about our services and the work that we do. There's also opportunity to contact us. Here's our information, which you'll receive this presentation following the webinar. And we're happy to address any questions that we might receive as well, and we'll follow up with you directly. But thank you all for your time today. Jen, Katie, thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thanks very much to our presenters, Deborah, Jennifer, and Katie. Later today, you will receive an email with their contact information and a recording of the webinar. Also, the slides and recordings for all PYA webinars are available on the Insights page of PYA's website, pyapc.com. While at our website, you may register for other PYA webinars and learn more about the full range of services offered by PYA. Please remember to stay on the line once the webinar disconnects to complete a short survey and post any other questions you may have. On behalf of PYA, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.